So my name is Dana. I'm Lebanese, but I currently live in Illinois, in the US. And today I'm going to be talking about the forgotten theater of World War II, the Middle East and North Africa. So my question is, what was the Middle East and North African region's role in World War II? And I'm specifically going to be talking about Syria and Lebanon in the Middle East and North Africa. So first, I'd like to say that I'm not an expert, but I promise that I tried to learn as much as I could to satisfy my curiosity about this topic. Someone here might know more than me about this topic, so please correct me, ask questions, and contribute, but do it nicely. I'm not trying to persuade you of my agenda or convince you to take action. My only hope is that my presentation might cultivate your own curiosities. So first, I'm going to be talking about European powers in the Middle East and why they were interested in this region during this time. And then I'm going to be talking about the North African campaign and the Syrian-Lebanese campaign. And then I'm going to be talking briefly about the Middle East and North African region after World War II. So what led me to this was that I was studying World War II in my US history class, obviously from the point of view of the US. And it got me thinking what the Middle East's role was in this war and if they even did have a significant role in it. And then as I started researching, I realized that this is a part of history that seems to be ignored and forgotten, and it people think it's like not important. And so I wanted to shed some light on it. So first of all, the World War II was divided into two sides. So you had the Allied powers, which were led by Great Britain, the Soviet Union, and the United States. And then you had the Axis powers, which were mainly Germany, Japan, and Italy. And so after World War I, Great Britain was the main power to divide the Middle East and North African region and established Middle East Command. And as you can see in the map, like this shows what countries controlled which Arab countries. And one of the reasons for this was to secure the routes to India and the Far East. As you can see in the other map, it's clearly like the Middle East provides like a gateway to India and the Eastern countries. So this is one of the reasons why Britain was interested in this area. And then another reason was obviously the oil supply. So World War II was a war that heavily relied on machines like ships, tanks, planes, and other machines that required enormous amounts of oil to operate. And so whichever side controlled Egypt specifically, had better access to the world's best sources of oil because Egypt acted as a gateway to Iran and the Arabian Peninsula. At this time, the Soviet Union and Britain were in control of Iran, and Iran needed to remain in their power in Allied hands because in order for the Persian corridor to remain open. So the Persian corridors in this picture, it's basically, it was like supply routes from Iran into the Soviet Union to supply the Soviet Union with like British supplies and aid. And the reason why this was so important is because it could be operated at all times of the year, not only in the warm weather, even in the winter months, it was still open. Britain also wanted to keep this area out of control of other great powers, specifically Germany and Italy, because if the Middle East fell into Axis hands, then they could use it as a land passage to attack the USSR and British-controlled Egypt and India. And the last reason is the Suez Canal. So Britain was interested in the canal because it provided it with a shorter sea route to its empire and India, as you can see in the map, as I mentioned earlier. It also provided a shorter sea route to the oil fields of the Persian Gulf, and it provided a shorter sea route for moving troops and materials between the European and Pacific region. And this is why Britain was committed to protect the canal during the war. At the start of World War II, it was managed by Britain, and Britain gave Egypt nominal independence in 1922, but it wasn't until 1936 that they agreed that that Egypt would be like an independent state, but it would allow for British troops to be stationed at the canal in order to protect Britain's financial and strategic interests in the canal. wanting to expand their African empire and threaten Britain's vital strategic assets, which were the Persian oil fields and the Suez Canal. Italy declared war on Britain and France in 1940, and they invaded Egypt from their colony in Libya. So with the video that you can see, Italy advanced, but after a limited advance, they were repulsed at Sidi Barrani, and the British, they attacked them and they pushed them back, and the Italians were defeated really quickly, and their offensive ended in the 7th of February 1941. And so Afrika Corps was the German military unit fighting in the North Africa campaign during this time. And you can see the red map that's going to pop up. And they basically fought on Italy's behalf. They intervened on Italy's behalf. So the fight for North Africa took place in the Libyan and Egyptian deserts, which is known as the Western Desert Campaign, and in Morocco and Algeria, which was known as Operation Torch, as well as Tunisia, known as the Tunisia Campaign. And in all of the battles during this campaign, the further that both sides advanced, the harder it was to keep their forces supplied because they were in the desert. So both sides suffered shortage of fuel, rapid advances were followed by equally rapid retreats, and vehicles kept breaking down. Natural water supplies were also almost non-existent, so water had to be transported in vehicles like this Bowser. People, the troops needed to survive really, really high daytime temperatures and the really cold nights. Disease also took toll on the troops. So both sides suffered from the desert conditions. However, Germany, they had a really good commander that was leading them, Erwin Rommel. And so in the video that I'm going to show you now, you can see that the Germans, not only did they have a good commander, but their tactics proved superior to those of the British for several months. And the British were constantly being outfought by the Germans. And so the Germans were able to take Tripoli in Libya, and then the port of Tobruk, and they were more successful in the beginning. However, after 2 years of fighting, as you'll see in the video as well, at Al Alamein, this was the Battle of Al Alamein was considered the turning point of this campaign. And this is when the German troops, they tried to break through, but because of the short fuel and supplies that I talked about earlier, they were repulsed at Alam Halfa, which is south of Al Alamein, and this gave the British the opportunity to attack the Axis forces, and the Germans, they withdrew westwards into Tunisia, as you can see. British were able to take back Tobruk and Tripoli and everything that the Axis basically took in the beginning. And so in the next video, you can see that as the Germans, they withdrew into Tunisia, the British forces, they kind of cornered them from both sides. So you had they came from the west side and then from the east side, and they were able to kind of trap the Germans. And so the Germans and the Italians, they actually surrendered. 250,000 of their troops surrendered after the British went into Tunisia. And this basically marked the end of the fight for North Africa. And so this is a quote from the Marshal Erwin Rommel. The battle is going very heavily against us. We're being crushed by the enemy weight. We are facing very difficult days, perhaps the most difficult a man can undergo. So here are some more pictures. The fight across the North African desert lasted nearly 3 years, from 1940 to 1943, ending with Italy and Germany's defeat. And this was really important. It was considered a turning point of the whole war, because this battle marked the end. It basically eliminated the Axis threat to Egypt, the Suez Canal, and the Middle Eastern and Persian oil fields. And so it really boosted national morale for Britain, and it became one of the most celebrated victories of the war. So now I'm going to be talking about the Syrian-Lebanese campaign. So the Syrian-Lebanese campaign is one of the least known operations of the Second World War, which is why I chose to talk about it. And this is when British, Australian, Free French, and British Indian troops invaded Syria and Lebanon from Palestine and Iraq between the 7th of June and 11th of July in 1941. And this was against the Vichy France government. And the Vichy France was a puppet government set up by the occupying German forces. And the aim of the campaign was to occupy Syria and Lebanon to prevent the establishment of a German presence there that could threaten Britain's bases in Palestine, and also preventing Nazi Germany from using Lebanon and Syria as like springboards to attack Egypt, especially since Egypt's position in, Britain's position in Egypt was not very strong at that time because they were fighting the North African campaign further west in the desert. And so the Vichy France was also already like cooperating with Germany and Italy to kind of start an anti-British insurrection in Iraq. And so this was kind of like a response to that, and that's why it started. And so how this was going, the plan of this campaign was for them to march onto Beirut and capture Beirut from Palestine along the Lebanese coast. And then further east, you would also have them march onto Damascus from Palestine as well. And then after those two, cities were captured, they would march from Iraq onto capture Tripoli, Homs, and Palmyra. And so the Vichy French, they resisted skillfully along each of those advances. However, Allied forces were able to capture Damascus, and then they went on to capture Beirut. And so when on the 10th of July, when the Australians were 10 kilometers away from Beirut and the British brigade were closing on Homs and the Indian division advanced into northern Syria from Iraq, and this is when the Vichy French commander basically ordered a ceasefire. And so as a result, Allied soldiers completely took control of Syria and Lebanon, and this deprived the Axis countries from using like Middle Eastern oil, and they lost their only really important position in the Middle East. During World War II, when all of this was going on, nationalist forces, they grew by numbers and they started to demand more self-governance. And so with the end of World War II and the weakening of Britain and France, because Britain could no longer pay the costs of maintaining troops all along the Middle East, there was increased hope and demands for full independence. So the end of World War II hastened the end of the formal control of European powers, and it brought political independence to the Middle East. And so each Arab country went through different paths to achieve their independence. So some faced like extreme bloodshed, while others gained independence through relatively peaceful means. I'd like to mention, however, Palestine did not gain independence. British troops withdrew from Palestine in May of 1948, and they basically turned the Palestinian conflict over to the UN, and eventually this led to the Jews and the Arabs fighting in the Six-Day War. And in this map, you can see like which country was in control of what Arab country, and then when they gained independence on the date. Yeah, these are my references, and thank you.